I am a truck driver, and my life on the open road is one of solitude and freedom. I have driven for years, traveling the highways and back roads of the country, delivering cargo to destinations far and wide. But one night, everything changed. One night, I encountered something that I cannot explain, something that has left me haunted and terrified. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that makes you want to stay indoors, wrapped in a cozy blanket. But I had a job to do, a delivery to make, and so I set out into the darkness. The rain pounded against the windshield, the wipers working overtime to clear my view. I drove for hours, the only sound the hum of the engine and the patter of raindrops. As the night wore on, I began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling that something was off, that something was watching me. I shook it off, thinking that it was just my imagination getting the better of me, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every mile I traveled. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her hair matted and wild. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The truck hit her with a sickening thud, and I could feel the impact reverberate through my body. I sat there for a moment, stunned, before I climbed out of the cab to check on the woman. But when I got to her, she was gone. There was no sign of her, no blood, no body. It was as if she had never been there in the first place. Shaken, I climbed back into the truck and continued on my journey, but the sense of unease had only grown stronger. Every shadow seemed to conceal something sinister, every bump in the road felt like an omen. And then, in the distance, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a figure, standing in the middle of the road. It was too far away to make out any details, but I knew in my bones that it was the woman I had hit earlier. I slammed on the brakes, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with empty eyes. I tried to reverse the truck, to get away from whatever was out there, but the wheels spun uselessly in the mud. And then, with a sickening crunch, the figure was under my truck once more. I climbed out, shaking with fear, but again, there was no sign of the woman. I knew then that I was not alone on the open road. There was something out there, something that was haunting me, and it wasn't going to let me go. As I drove on, the rain beating down on the truck like a drum, I could feel something closing in on me. It was a feeling of dread, a sense that whatever was out there was getting closer and closer. And then, in the distance, I saw a faint light. Relief flooded through me as I realized that it was a gas station, a place where I could take refuge from whatever was out there in the darkness. I pulled into the station, my heart racing with fear and anticipation, but the relief was short-lived. As I stepped out of the truck, I could feel something watching me. It was a presence, a malevolent force that I couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of my being. I hurried into the gas station, hoping to find some sanctuary within, but the gas station was empty, except for a lone figure standing behind the counter. It was an old man, and as soon as I entered, he looked up at me with a strange look in his eyes. His face was weathered and wrinkled, and his eyes seemed to bore into my soul. "Can I help you?" he asked in a raspy voice. I told him that I needed gas and asked if there was a restroom I could use. He pointed me in the direction of the bathroom, and as I walked away, I could feel his eyes on my back. When I entered the restroom, I was hit with a wave of cold air. It was freezing in there, and I could see my breath in front of me. As I approached the sink, I heard a whispering sound, like someone talking in hushed tones. I turned around, but there was no one there. The whispering continued, growing louder and more urgent. It was as if the voices were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the whispering stopped. I turned to leave, but the door was stuck. I pulled on it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard footsteps approaching. They were slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer. And then, the door swung open, and the old man from the counter was standing there, holding a large wrench in his hand. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice harsh and accusatory. I explained that I was just using the restroom, but he didn't seem to believe me. He grabbed me by the arm and pulled me out into the main area of the gas station, where he threw me against the wall. "You should leave now," he said, his eyes burning into mine. "This place isn't safe for you." I tried to protest, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept repeating the same thing over and over again, like a broken record. And then, just as suddenly as he had attacked me, he let me go and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I was shaken to my core, but I knew I had to get out of there. I quickly filled up the truck with gas and got back on the road, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away from the gas station, I could see something in my rear-view mirror. It was a figure, standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. It was the same woman from before, her eyes empty and her face twisted into a grotesque smile. I drove faster with my pedal to the floor, and when I turned around, she was gone. I eventually got to the hotel I was staying at for the night after what felt like an eternity. I finally felt safe for the first time all night and immediately drifted off to sleep. It was a typical night on the open road, and I was driving my truck through a remote stretch of highway. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding landscape. As I drove, I saw a figure up ahead. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothing, his face obscured by a hooded cloak. I slowed down, thinking that maybe he needed help, but as I got closer, I realized that something was off. The man's cloak was stained with what looked like blood, and his eyes were wide and staring. He raised his arm, and I could see that he was holding a large knife. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The man lunged forward, his knife glinting in the moonlight. I swerved to avoid him, but he was too quick, and the blade sliced through the side of the truck. I scrambled to get away, but the man was relentless, chasing after me as I sped down the road. I could hear his cackling laughter in my ears, and I knew that I was in serious trouble. I tried to call for help on my radio, but there was nothing but static. It was as if the entire world had gone silent, leaving me alone with my fear and my attacker. As the man caught up to me, he slammed his knife into the side of the truck again and again, until it was all I could hear. I knew that I had to do something, or I was going to die out here on the open road. I grabbed a tire iron from the back of the truck and swung it at the man. It connected with his arm, and he screamed in pain, dropping the knife. I didn't stop there. I kept swinging, hitting him over and over again until he finally crumpled to the ground. And then, I drove away as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally made it to the nearest town, I reported the incident to the police. They went out to investigate, but they never found any evidence of the man or his attack. To this day, I don't know what that man wanted or who he was. All I know is that I was lucky to survive that night on the open road. I'll never forget the sound of his laughter ringing in my ears. I had been driving my truck for days without rest, and I was exhausted. I needed a break, but I was in the middle of nowhere, with nothing in sight but the open road. As I drove, I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving, strange shapes in the distance. I figured it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, so I kept driving. But then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I hit the figure with a sickening thud, and the truck screeched to a halt. I got out of the truck, my heart racing. The figure was lying motionless on the ground, its face obscured by a hooded cloak. I approached cautiously, trying to see if the person was alive. But as I got closer, I realized that something was off. The cloak was stained with what looked like blood, and the person's hands were twisted and contorted. Suddenly, the person sat up, their eyes opening wide, and that's when I saw them. They were completely white, like they had no pupils or irises. I stumbled backwards, horrified. The figure stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural. It started to walk towards me, its hands outstretched. I ran back to my truck, jumping inside and locking the doors, but the figure didn't stop. It kept walking, its white eyes fixed on me. I tried to start the truck, but it wouldn't turn over. And then the figure was at the window, its twisted face pressed up against the glass. I screamed, but no one was around to hear me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared into the darkness. I tried to call for help from my cell phone, but it was completely dead. I was finally about to get the truck to turn over and quickly drove away. It was only 30 more minutes I had left to go, but they felt like hours. I was so paranoid and on edge from that experience. I eventually was able to make it to the loading dock and deliver my goods. The very next day I quit the job because I was still so traumatized from that experience. I never knew what that figure was or where it came from. But I'll never forget the feeling of terror that it left me with, or the white eyes that seemed to stare into my soul.